Notre Dame fans, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. Here we are sitting here on Tuesday, February 4th. I'm joined by my guy, Trevor Trowbridge. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here talking about the Notre Dame defense. Trevor, we had this conversation about the offense last week, and we had this conversation about looking ahead to the Notre Dame offense in 25 and things that have us excited and concerns that we have and things like that. And we're like, well, we can't really do the defense because we can't really have a conversation about the defense until we know who the defensive coordinator is going to be. And now we know. And so now we're going to talk about it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at several different aspects of the Notre Dame defense, and we'll kick things off with a conversation about just the importance of this defense to keep rolling. We'll dive into some reasons why we believe, at least for next season, no matter kind of honestly what happens at D coordinator, that they're have a shot to be as good, if not better. We'll dive into that. We'll talk about some potential breakout players, and then we'll have a mailbag. So if you want to get some mailbag questions in, go ahead and get those in now. We were going to start at 1:00, but somebody who I don't want to point fingers or name names forgot to set the show. So I go on there like 12:50. Was about 12:50 when I texted you, Trev. And I'm like, all right, let me get ready for the show. And I'm like, wow, I set it up and did not hit submit. So we didn't have a show published. And I was like, well, I can't do it now because people won't have time. So that's why we're getting started today. I'd like to come up with a really cool reason, like, hey, listen, there was this happening in my neighborhood and I had to go out there and save the entire neighborhood and save burning buildings. It's because I'm an idiot. And so that's why we're getting a little bit started a little bit late today. But you know what, Trevor? Better late than never. And I'm very excited to talk about the Notre Dame defense.
I'm ready to dive into it today, man. I'm excited. It's a good conversation to have, especially now that we know who Notre Dame's defensive coordinator is going to be. But I'm with you. I hopped into StreamYard and nothing was popping up, and I logged out and logged back in like 3 times. I was like, oh, Brian's going to be so mad if I forgot a password or
I'm logging in the wrong site.
I was like, oh, and then I started second guessing myself. I was like, it's StreamYard, right? And I was like, that's I'm pretty sure. I only haven't done a show in a couple days, I feel like. But no, we're ready to rock and roll, man. I'm excited to jump into it today.
Yeah, you haven't done a show since Friday because we got the new the new RTCF show on Mondays, which is gives you a nice little way to kick off your week and get some work done, maybe spend some time with your wife and not have to worry about doing a show. Although you'll fill in for that show from time to time. I believe that. There's no doubt about that. So, Trevor, when we talk about the Notre Dame offense, I mean, really where the conversation has to start is really kind of looking at what the defense has been.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you look at the run that Notre Dame has been on defense, and Marcus Freeman gets a lot of credit for what we're seeing right now, but Notre Dame defensively has really been the Notre Dame defense has really been the driving force behind success for a long time. Obviously, 05-06 success was primarily driven by the offense. The defense was okay. Had some talented players, but that was an offensive-driven team. 02, that team was driven by a really good defense. Still think of the Jerome Sapp and Glenn Earl and Vontez Duff and Shane Walton, Courtney Watson, that defense. Back in 02, you think about Cedric you had Daryl Campbell. What was Big Cedric's name? I'm trying to remember. Daryl Campbell was the one. I cannot believe I remember his name, first name, but I'm drawing a blank on Notre Dame's big defensive tackle that they had there. I know people in the chat are going to help me remember that one, but anyway, had a great defense that year. You look at like the 2010 to 2012 success that Notre Dame did have. The defense drove it. The offense finally steps up a little bit in 2012, and then all of a sudden Notre Dame goes 12-0 because the defense is elite. Bob Diaco built some really good defenses at Notre Dame. You had the disaster that was the era of Brian Van Gorder, which is just an absolute train wreck. And then you get into it turns around. You bring in Mike Elko and Clark Lee in 2017. Mike Elko gets that foundation started. Clark Lee builds on it. Your defense is a big reason why you're successful in 18. Obviously, the 2015 success was built on a great offense and then a talented defense that overcame bad coaching. But in those big games, I mean, you couldn't make stops early against Clemson. You couldn't make stops against Stanford. You couldn't make stops against Ohio State with that defense. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, a big reason for the team's success was defense. And there were some ups and downs in those years. 21 started off with a little bit of a rough transition under Marcus Freeman, but by the end of the year, that defense was outstanding. And you just look back at this football team, and you know what it has been. It's been really good on defense, but over the last 2 years, we've really seen it jump to a whole nother level, Trevor. I mean, you look at the success that Clark Lee had. You know, him and Mike Elko show up in 2017. Mike Elko running the defense. Clark Lee is the linebackers coach. They go from 27.8 points per game all the way down to 21.5. Clark Lee takes over in 2018. They give up 18 points a game. They give up 17-9 the next year. They give up 19-7 the next year during the COVID playoff year. They give up 19-7 in 2021. You go up to 23 in the first year of Al Golden. And as we've talked about, part of that was you gave up four touchdowns that year on offense or defense. You gave up, so they'd have been around 21. And then 23, they dropped down to 15.9. In this past season, they dropped down to 15.5, despite playing 4 playoff games where you're playing the best of the best. They hold teams to 15.5 points per game, and the defense has really just risen to a whole new level. And it's very important. Marcus Freeman, obviously, as the head coach, gets a lot of that credit. Al Golden, being the architect of that defense, gets a lot of credit. He had a great coaching staff around him. You have the best secondary coach in college football, and Mike Mickens. You know, Marcus Freeman, I think, made a great hire at linebacker. You know, bringing in Max Bulla, who I think has done a really good job as a teacher. And you know, I know Al Washington's kind of a love him or hate him kind of assistant coach, man. But you think about all the injuries that Notre Dame dealt with. You know, everybody loves to praise Joe Rudolph for the job he did with the offensive line last year. And I'm kind of like, yeah, he did a nice job last year. Sometimes those injuries led to him being forced to overcome maybe mistakes he made with personnel. But like, you give him credit for the things that he did. What he went through is nothing compared to what Al Washington went through with injuries last year. You know, losing Jordan Patel in game 3, then losing Boubacar in game 5, then Howard goes down for a quarter of the season. Then as soon as he comes back, Riley goes down. You have Jason Onye kind of getting booted off the team early in the season. I mean, it just Josh Burnham misses time with injuries, and to still have that line play the way that it did is a really, really good coaching job. So you've seen a lot of growth here. The recruiting has gotten better. And now you're entering another period of uncertainty with the defense in certain ways, in a lot of ways, because you've got a new coordinator. Al Golden is gone. You had some big personnel losses in Riley Mills and Howard Cross and R.J. Oben and Jack Kaiser and Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts. I mean, you had at least one all-time Notre Dame great players leaving your defense. And now you're in a situation where the unit that has been sort of the backbone for the majority of your success the last 20 years, with a couple of exceptions, now enters a period of uncertainty. Not uncertainty of is it going to be good or bad, or it's an unknown, because you now have a new defensive coordinator. So when you look at it, Trev, it's one of those things where this is a football team that has been driven by defensive success. And we expect, you and I have talked about this, we expect this team to be even better this upcoming season in certain ways. But the reality is this: no matter what you think about how in the offense, that we think the offense is going to be a lot better this year. But no matter what you think of how good the offense is, the reality is your defense has to remain great, because defense is where consistency comes from. And you and I were chatting before the show about, looking back at some of these great teams that won with big time offenses and how they'd have these games where the offense doesn't show up. But you look at the 2022 and 2021 Georgia team, and they scored a lot of points, but there were plenty of weeks where the offense didn't show up and the defense bailed them out. You think of the Kentucky game in 2022. You think of the win over Clemson in 2021 that started this whole thing for Georgia, where they beat Clemson, who was coming off of a playoff berth, 10-3, and didn't score an offensive touchdown in that 10-3 win. And there's going to be weeks where your offense doesn't show up. Consistency comes from defense. And the point you made, Trevor, which is the example you made, was phenomenal. Oregon wins with offense. But every time their offense has a rough day, they get beat. And a perfect example is the Ohio State game. And anytime they're playing a team that's even remotely good, if their offense has an off day, You get in the Ohio State game in the playoff, and Evan Stewart's hurt, the running back goes down, and they can't score 40 points or 30-plus points, and all of a sudden, look what happens. They get rolled because their defense isn't good enough. They got talent, but it's still not a great defense. And the concern that I have for Notre Dame, and this isn't a concern as in like it's an issue, but a concern as far as how the program always has to be, just in theory, is you have to remain an elite defense, or at least an outstanding defense, because that is how you become slump proof. That is how you maintain a level of consistency from week to week to week and season to season, knowing that, hey, our offense doesn't have to be elite every week. But then when it is, it makes you so much more dangerous. Because as I've always said, man, defense is going to get you to the show. Offense is going to be what wins it. And that's exactly what happened this year, right? Notre Dame rode its defense all the way to the title game. And then the offense needed to step up in the title game because the defense was having an off day and the offense wasn't good enough to get it done. So the offense clearly has to get better as well. But you've got to be able to score to a level to get in the championship. But to get there, you have to be able to play defense. And it's not a surprise that the 4 semifinal teams were arguably the 4 best defenses in college football last year. Arguably. You can make a case about this team or that team, but you're definitely going to include Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, and Penn State in that group of teams that are in the discussion for who had the 5 best defenses in college football last season. And if you look at the FEI ratings, Trevor, that's the Fermo Efficiency Index, and you look at where he had, I mean, the teams that were in the title game, he had Notre Dame and Ohio State 1-2. It's not a coincidence. And everybody talked about Ohio State's, how good their offense was, but their defense is why they were in the title. But here's who the FEI had as their top 4 defenses last year. This is efficiency, so it takes into consideration, things like, who you played and rankings and all that kind of stuff to try to give some level of, context to how good you are. And they had Notre Dame 1, Ohio State 2, Texas 3, Penn State 4. Not a coincidence at all when you look at that. And then if you look at the ESPN's power rankings, Texas 1, the Football Power Index, Texas 1, Notre Dame 2, Ohio State 3, Tennessee was 4. They have Penn State 7. They had I kind of laugh at the FPI one because they had Alabama 6. Like you can't give me Alabama's defense being the 6th best defense in the country. We watched something completely different than what you watched. The point is, 4 best defensive teams in college football last year made the playoff. Who played for the championship? In my opinion, the 2 best offenses. Who won the championship? The team with the better offense. Right? So offense matters, but to get to that point, your defense has to remain elite. Especially when you look at some of the upcoming schedules Notre Dame's going to be facing the next couple of years. Because let's be honest, y'all know my opinion on the Chris Ash hire. We're going to have to look at the statistics of what he does a little differently in the next 3 seasons than we did the last 2, because the reality is, if things stay the same of what they are now, the offensive schedule is going to be better the next couple of years than what it has been the last couple of years. So 17 points a game may be similar to 15.5, depending on the context of the opponents, but it has to remain an outstanding defense. So that long-winded kind of intro lays the groundwork for what we're going to discuss, because no matter what you think of how the offense is going to be the next few years, Trev, and we think it could end up being really good, to get back to that stage, your defense has to maintain, if not even get better, moving forward. That's the task that's in front of Chris Ash, Mike Mickens, Max Bulla, Al Washington, and of course, most importantly, Marcus Freeman.
Look, everybody wants to go and dive into, what does a team have to have in order to win a national championship? And the easiest answer is, well, they have to have an elite receiving core, because Devontae Smith has a Heisman and a national championship ring. And LSU with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson won all that. And it's like, yes, that's true, but Georgia never had that in 21 and 22. Like, they had really good receivers, but they didn't have that, right?
Their best pass catcher was a tight end.
Right. Michigan didn't have that, but what they had, what all of the teams outside of LSU 2019 being the outlier, is they all had fantastic defenses. They all had great defenses. Ohio State in 24, great defense. Michigan 23, great defense. Georgia 21, 22, great defenses. Alabama in 2020, yes, Mac Jones had a great year. Devontae Smith had a great year. Yes, their offense was putting up 38, 40 points a game. Their defense was still holding people to like 15, right? So it's not like they were putting up 45 points a game in the way that LSU's defense or LSU's team was, right? LSU was putting up 45 points a game because there was a good chance their defense was going to allow like 27, 28, and so defense is what's going to have to get you there. Everybody always wonders why Notre Dame is always in the championship discussion. I'm sure people in the chat have heard it. I know Bryan and I have heard it. It's like, well, Notre Dame, what have they done? They're always in the conversation around national championships and title contenders. It's like, well, it's because they were 87 and 18 overall since 2017. And you go through and look at that, and the driving force was the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Teams don't go 87 and 18 if their defense is meh. And if they do that, they had an insane run of high-powered offense. From 17 to last year in 2024, Notre Dame had a really, really good offense 2-3 of those years, maybe, and so you go through and you dive into what the defensive side of the ball means. Like that's Notre Dame's ticket. To Brian's point, they're going to be playing more high-powered offenses in this upcoming schedule, right? But 17 points a game, if the offense is what we believe them to be, 17 points we could still look at that and say, well, they're basically still giving up 15, right? Because now instead of the defense holding to 15 and the offense scoring 30, maybe the defense is holding to 17 and the offense is scoring 35, 38. So it's all within like relativity to each other. And that's what's going to be interesting about this defense. And the question that we're going to talk about today is, can they? Can they? And we believe that they can for a long list of reasons. So fact of the matter is, defense has to remain where it's at for Notre Dame to not fall into the 2018 to 2019, right? The 2012 to 2013, the 2015 to 2016. There's going to be a lot of adjustments that are going to have to be made, but they have the pieces in place where the continuity is going to be strong, in my opinion, Bryan.
Yeah, there's no question, Trevor. I mean, you look at teams that have at times been really good, like had those great offenses you mentioned, LSU. And my question is always, that was a great run. I would take that run in a heartbeat at Notre Dame. I would take a 16-0 season with an offense that scores almost 50 points a game. But that's fun as a fan. But if we're talking about building a program that's consistent, what did LSU do before and after that? And why? Because what had happened with LSU is they had taken a step back in regard to their ability to play defense. Early in the 2010s, their defense was the driving force behind a lot of their success. Their defense stopped being as good. And, their defense was almost identical in 2018 as it was 2019. It was okay. It was like 21 points a game, around 335 to 345 yards per game. One year they go, 10 and, or 15 and 0. And then the other year they're kind of a disappointing, 10-3 team that nobody really loves. They go 10-3. They lose to Texas A&M. They get blown out by Alabama. They lose to Florida. They don't really have any good wins that year. I don't think anybody they beat ended the season ranked, and you beat UCF in a bowl game. And then in 2020, your defense takes a big step back and you go 5-5. And then you've got that great year in between. But you had that one great offensive year, but consistency comes from being able to play defense. And I'll give Ryan Day a lot of credit because they went through a stretch at Ohio State where they were really taking a step back on defense, sort of the end of the Urban Meyer era. And that's why people say, Urban Meyer recommended a guy. Urban Meyer made a lot of bad decisions when it came to hiring defensive coordinators in Ohio State. A lot of bad decisions. And, but they were kind of taking a step back. And I give Ryan Day a lot of credit, and I did it at the time, of going out and hiring Jim Knowles, knowing it would take him a couple of years to kind of get that thing turned around. And it did. They started getting really good on defense last year. But he knew we can't go out there and win playoff games 42-41. We can't be giving up 40-some points to Michigan. We can't be doing this. We can't be doing that. And if we're going to consistently compete for championships, he understood that. And that's a big thing is Ohio State's offense. This is one of the least effective offensive stretches they've had over a 2-year period. I mean, they've averaged about 33 to 34 points a game the last 2 years. That's it. They were at 35 this year. They were just under 31 last year. But yet they went 11-2 last year, 14-2 this year, won a national championship. Why? Because their defense became elite. And now they're going to have to struggle with the way Notre Dame is of can they keep it going? But that's the reality of it, Trevor, is Notre Dame, in order to be a consistent winner, has to make sure that they take no steps back on defense. That's the foundation that needs to be established. Now, let's get specific about this defense, Trevor, because here's the question in front of Notre Dame. A lot of what became the foundation of the success the last 2 years is now gone. The architect of the defense is gone, and Al Golden. And I don't mean that as any disrespect to Marcus Freeman, like he had no hand in it. Marcus Freeman's job was to hire an excellent defensive coordinator, and he did that. And that's what he's paid to do. He wasn't in there installing game plans every week and all that. That doesn't mean he couldn't if he wanted to. And Marcus Freeman's a great defensive mind, but he wants to be the head coach. And that's why he makes the hires he does. And he made a great hire in Al Golden. And Al Golden was the architect of what they did. And he's gone. You're basically your best player of the Marcus Freeman era, with all due respect to Joe Alt and all those other. I mean, your best player for the last 3 years has been Xavier Watts. And just the job he's done as a leader, as a playmaker, as just a consistent force on that defense. And I don't think people appreciate how good of a job he had to do this year as a leader, because he was surrounded for most of the year with young guys. He had a true sophomore safety, a true sophomore corner, and a true freshman cornerback playing around him for over half the season. And was able to kind of keep that group going, partly because they have talent, good coaching with Mike Mickens, but great leadership with Xavier Watts as well. And Jordan Clark. I give him a lot of credit for that as well. And Rod Hurd did some good things, but that was Xavier Watts' unit. He's gone. You had an outstanding defensive tackle duo the last 2 years. Now, at times this year, it wasn't as good as you hoped it would be. But the fact is the reason the defense took a step back when Mills and Cross were down is because they didn't have a Mills or Cross ready to step in and play to their level. There was no Leonard Moore at defensive tackle when Riley Mills went down. That doesn't mean Gabriel Rubio didn't do some good things, because I would argue the Georgia game was the best game Gabriel Rubio's ever played. I mean, he was outstanding in that game. But he's not at the point yet where he could then do that against Penn State and then do that against Ohio State. He wasn't bad in either one of those games, but he couldn't beat Riley Mills, where Leonard Moore stepped in for Benjamin Morrison, was like, yeah, I'm that dude as well. Donovan Heinisch did a great job late in the regular season filling in for Howard Cross when he went down, and was outstanding in that from a production standpoint. But then as the competition ramped up, he wasn't quite as impactful as he was, which is not a knock on him. It's just that's what happens when you play better teams. And so you didn't have sort of that interior defensive next in line to step in and just replace it, which then moving forward is a question mark about, are you going to be able to be as good there? You lose those guys. Jack Kaiser just dominated the Senior Bowl. I think he was one of the most underappreciated members of the defense really the last 2 seasons. 2022, I thought Jack was very up and down with his play. He was pretty darn good last year, Trev. You and I talked about it preseason, about his per snap production related to what it was with J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau, who we all, most of us agree were pretty good players in 2023, but Jack's production was really outstanding. He comes out this year. He has 55 solo tackles, which was 10 more than what JD ever had or in the 2 years under Al Golden. Now, again, he played a lot more games, but it's still a really outstanding season that he had. Ends up with 90 tackles. He does a great job for this defense. He also has 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He had a number of clutch plays. He was a very key part of that defense. You're losing Jordan Clark, who is a really good football player for you. I don't count him as much because I'm trying to focus more on the guys that have been a part of the last 2 great defenses. Benjamin Morrison is gone. Now, I know Leonard Moore did a great job stepping in, but now Leonard has a different task. Now you're the guy. Now you are the guy that everybody's looking to now. Your role's different as opposed to the freshman that you just hope he does well. And now it's like, okay, now you're a preseason All-American. Everybody thinks you're going to be the guy. There's a different level of pressure on you. You got to handle that. But the reality is the guys that were the big drivers of that turnaround, Golden, Watts, Morrison, Mills, Cross, Kaiser, Bertrand, Leofau, those guys are all gone. And now there's a true changing of the guard that's unlike what we've seen in past years, where in past years you'd lose a guy and there's some senior or fifth-year guy ready to take over that mantle. That's not true of this defense. Their defense is going to be driven by juniors and younger for the most part. And so it's a very different transition than what we've seen in the past. And so the question is, can they keep this going with the players that they lost, with the coaching that they lost? The big question now remains, with all of that hitting in one offseason, can Marcus Freeman push the right buttons to make sure this thing keeps going and that they have an outstanding defense? Even if they take a small step back, as long as it's small, that's fine. I can live with that. But you've got to still be in that top 10, borderline top 5 defense for next season. And we'll get into some of the reasons why, but that's the challenge that sits in front of. We're going to go over some reasons for optimism and why we think actually they will. But that's the challenge. That's the question. We can tell you what we think is going to happen, but that's what has to happen, is this defense has to continue to play at that level despite those personnel losses. Now, Notre Dame's not alone, Trevor, because this conversation would be even uglier if we were talking about all the losses that Ohio State had.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So they're not alone. They're not the only team going through that, but we're just talking about Notre Dame right now. And so them continuing their team success is going to require them to have to replace some pretty important parts of this defense, and that's really what makes this task even more challenging.
Yeah, the biggest question that I have, Bryan, it kind of goes down to 3 different people, and it's no disrespect to Jordan Clark or Ben Morrison or Jack Kaiser or any of the other pieces that have been a part of this defensive turnaround, but you kind of go back through and you look at when Notre Dame's defense had a big game coming up, right? Or we would talk about it in Keys to Victory. There's always 3 people that we mentioned ad nauseum almost every single week. And it was Al Golden, Xavier Watts, and Riley Mills. And those were the 3 guys that it was always like, all right, when you relied on somebody to have a big play, I can't tell you how many times you and I were sitting in Keys to Victory. And when I was just getting started, me, you, and Ryan would sit in Keys to Victory. And it was always, this just feels like a Xavier Watts game. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like he's going to get a big game-changing play, like which he did.
Trevor, we would sit here and say, we would talk to ourselves and bring up, hey, let's go this direction this game. Because I felt like it was getting to the point where, like, are we being lazy by just talking about Xavier Watts every week? But it was almost kind of like, how do you not?
Right. It was always funny going through Keys to Victory, and on offense, it was, look for this and look for these post-snap switches and look for this. And then on defense, it was like, Al Golden's going to have to draw up a good game plan, and Riley Mills is going to have to do what he did for the last 5 games, and Xavier Watts is going to have to be Xavier Watts. like literally, that was a lot of our conversation. And to me, those are the big questions, right? Obviously, it starts up top with Chris Ash, and it's like, look, nobody's asking you to be Al Golden. People are asking you to be the best version of yourself, which is what people got to see when you were at Ohio State, right? I have my feelings about it too. But at the end of the day, I'm not on the Notre Dame staff. I have no hand in that matter. So the situation is what it is. And so now I'm to the point where we got to see the best version of Chris Ash. I know you're in the same boat, right? Regardless of the feelings about it, he is Notre Dame's defensive coordinator for the 2025 season. And so we are going to have to hope that he, along with Marcus Freeman, continue to hold that line and hold that standard of, hey, this is what the defense is, right? For Xavier Watts, it is now somebody on the defense is going to have to step up and be the guy of who's going to be the next Xavier Watts that we're talking about. Not in terms of, all right, man, we have to find the next safety that's going to have 13 interceptions in 2025 and 2026. But it's who's going to be that guy.
Who's the playmaker that steps up when the game is on the line? And that's really what made Riley Mills and Xavier Watts both so good last year. Riley was really good in 2023, but he was a different type of good. This year, it seems like whenever they needed a sack, whenever they needed a stop, whenever they needed a play by a lineman, it seemed like Riley was that guy. When they needed a turnover, when they needed a tackle, when they needed a big play on defense, Xavier was that guy. Like Xavier's 13 interceptions were not hollow interceptions that he was getting at like late into the second halves. They were like clutch situations, game on the line, put a game away or stop a drive, that type of thing where they mattered. And I'd rather have a guy that has 5 impactful turnovers than a guy that has 10 where 7 or 8 of them are either end of half situation, Hail Marys, 3rd and 10 bombs that, like it just, you want those turnovers to be impactful. And that's what made Xavier so special. And Riley was almost kind of like, I don't know that I'd necessarily say he was quite in the same boat, but I would say he was the closest thing I've seen since Khalid Kareem. And I've always talked about how much I loved Khalid Kareem in 2018 because he was not their best defensive player that year. He was part of a great defense. But the thing I loved about Khalid is if you were in the fourth quarter or it was 3rd down and you're like, somebody's got to step up and make a play, you're kind of like, okay, watch 53 on this play because I have a feeling he's going to step up and make a play.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of how he was. You need those money players. And for those guys this year, for the most part, now early in the season, it was Christian Gray was a big part of that, and late in the season, Leonard Moore became that with the forced fumble against Louisville and some of the plays he made. But you lost 2 of those guys. And I would argue that at times you lost 3 because Jack Kaiser had some pretty clutch plays this year as well. So that's a big part of it. It's not just losing talent and you replace talent with talent. To your point, Trevor, is you're not just losing talented players that produced numbers. You're losing guys that knew how to make winning plays. You can have a guy that's got 15 tackles on a losing team. Can you make the plays where, okay, I only had 7 tackles, but they were huge moments. And that's the thing that they're going to have to replace. Al Golden seemed to be really good at knowing what to dial up when the game was on the line. He struggled to get pressure against USC all game, but when he needed to dial up that pressure on that drive where it's 30, it was a 35-28. They're driving. He dials up that pressure. Jack Kaiser comes free, gets in the quarterback's face. He rushes a back shoulder throw. Christian picks it off, takes it back to the house.
Yep.
I mean, that was sort of that thing where you say, boy, that was a big time play. And that's what you're losing. And here's the thing I'll say about Chris Ash, Trevor. We said our piece in the first show. We don't need to have to keep reminding people of everybody knows where we stand. Here's the one, and there's a lot of Notre Dame fans not happy about this hire. But here's the thing that I believe 99% of Notre Dame fans can agree on. Now, there's that 1% of Notre Dame fans that literally, and it may be even bigger than this, but I'll say 1%, that would rather be right than for Notre Dame to have success. So if they don't think a guy's a good hire, they don't like Marcus Freeman or they don't like whatever, they would rather root for them to fail so they can be right. The vast majority of Notre Dame fans are not that way. We've all said our opinion on what we think of Chris Ash. A lot of us don't like that hire. A lot of us in this chat don't like that hire. But we all hope that we're wrong. We all hope that this is a home run for Marcus Freeman. And I hope that we're sitting here in 2 to 3 years having that same conversation about Al Golden. Now, again, it's different. My concerns with Al Golden were just about coordinating experience. It was not that I didn't think he was a very good coach.
Right.
With Chris Ash, I have questions if he's a championship caliber defensive coordinator. Well, he's got a championship. They didn't win that year because of their defense. They gave up 22 points a game. Notre Dame's not winning the national championship next year if they give up 22 points a game. They're not. So, but we hope he's right. He's right because he needs to be right. This hire needs to be the right one because, well, for a lot of reasons, but we'll focus on that one. And that's what's going to be a key is if Marcus Freeman is correct on how good this hire is. Part of the reason I have optimism is I can't change my opinion just because I have faith in Marcus Freeman. I have to give people an honest opinion of what I know and what I see.
Sure.
But the reason that I'm less woe is us is because I do have a level of faith in Marcus Freeman defensively to make decisions. There's a level of trust I have. I'm going to tell you all what I think and what I know about a hire, a coach, or a scheme or whatever, but you have to think this is his baby. Defense is his baby. I have to think that this was more than just Urban Meyer recommending him to him.
Right.
And he says, "Oh, okay, Urban, let's roll." I have to think that he did his due diligence and felt like this was the right hire. And that's why there's a level of optimism for me still, even though I have my feelings about Chris Ash, because like I'm more willing to stick to my guns on an offensive hire. Because Marcus Freeman's made very clear, I'm not an offensive guy. He's still young. He doesn't have that 30, 40 years of experience that guys like Nick Saban have, where you can kind of like, yeah, they're making great hires on both sides of the ball. And we've seen him, I mean, a lot of his shaky hires have been on offense, OC, receiver, things like that. But when it comes to defense, you got to be like, his track record's pretty good. He's the guy that saw how good Chris O'Leary was. Remember, it was Marcus Freeman's suggestion to Brian Kelly to promote Chris O'Leary to full time. Yeah. And he turned out to be not a great recruiter, but a heck of a defensive backs coach. He's the guy that obviously brought Mike Mickens over to Cincinnati. And then that led to him coming to Notre Dame. He obviously made the Al Washington hire. He's the one that when James Laurinaitis left, really liked the idea of promoting Max Bulla. And he brought in Max Bulla in the role that he had as a GA. And then, of course, the Al Golden hire, which we had question marks about because of, he hadn't coached the defense in almost 20 years, and he'd been in the NFL for a long time, et cetera, et cetera. Those were the concerns there. I always knew he was a great coach, and I thought he'd be a better recruiter. Actually, the thing I was wrong about on Al Golden is he wasn't a great recruiter. He had been a long time ago, but I think he was kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of over that, and I'll just do the closing. But it ended up being a home run hire.
Yeah.
Even though there were some question marks about it from people that like study the game and the people that aren't just like blindly supporting whatever the coach does. But he got it right. He nailed it. And now you hope that he's done that again. And if he has done that again, then my optimism about what's going to happen grows exponentially. And we'll talk about those reasons why in the next segment. But that's a big part of this is all going to come down to, did he make the right decision at defensive coordinator? And if he nailed it, and we hope that he did, then I don't think this is really going to be that big of a question mark. If he doesn't nail it, then you run the risk of taking a step back. And then the question becomes, how quickly does he recognize that he didn't make the right hire and make a change? When he did that pretty quickly on offense, can he, receiver and OC, depending on what you think may have happened with the offensive coordinator position. My belief is that Marcus Freeman did not force Jared Parker out, but that Jared Parker knew that there were going to be some changes and it might be good for you to pursue other opportunities.
Sure.
Meaning Marcus Freeman was very clearly not happy with how the offense was going, recognized it pretty quickly despite the numbers looking good, and he made a quick change, and then that next change is a home run. So either A, he nails this one, or B, if he doesn't, he quickly recognizes it and says, I'm going to make a change. He's shown a tendency to do that. Our hope is that he doesn't have to. The hope is that this is the hire. Yeah. That's the home run. And if it is, then this thing is just it's going to be like a well-oiled machine, dude. It's just going to keep on rolling, in my opinion.
And another thing, too, one thing, and I'm going to put this disclaimer out here now, and Brian, I know you and I understand this, but this is just kind of for ND Nation as a whole. It's going to look different, right? You can't expect Chris Ash to come in and be Al Golden. Right? There's going to be different players. Like we mentioned, there's not going to be a Riley Mills on the field. There's not going to be a Xavier Watts on the field. Luckily, one of the reasons why I didn't mention Jack Kaiser, who had a lot of great plays throughout 2024 and was a key role into them making the national championship. One of the reasons why I didn't mention Ben Morrison is we kind of already saw like the passing of the torch throughout the season. Obviously more so with Ben Morrison because literally he was not able to play. But you saw guys start to come on that weren't starters, right? You saw guys like a Jaden Osbury start to come on and guys like a Kingston come on. And then with Morrison's injury, you saw Leonard Moore come on. You started to hear good things about Carson Hobbs and how good postseason practice was going for him. So safety is one of those where they're going to have to, and it doesn't have to come at safety. Wouldn't be upset if they did. I mean, they have a guy in Adon Schuler that just got 16 games of on-the-field tutelage from Xavier Watts, right? That's got to mean something. Oh, and he's a really, really good athlete.
And he was known as a high IQ. I mean, Don Schuler was a National Honor Society kid. He was always known as a smart football player. The questions about him coming out of high school were more about what kind of athlete is he.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he kind of answered those. The football smarts was never the question. And then when, like you said, Trev, when he gets to spend an entire 2 whole years, one of them as part of the room that's not playing, and then the next, that's my partner in crime.
Yeah.
You know, that's my guy. I mean, that's so incredibly invaluable. You've talked about that multiple times this offseason, and I don't think you can overstate how important it is for a guy like a Don to get to spend that kind of time learning from someone like Xavier Watts. Because Xavier was not an elite athlete either, but he was an elite mind, and he was a good athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Don is. And I think you could not have, like, not saying that Kyle Hamilton or Harrison Smith or Alohi Gilman wouldn't have been great leaders either, although he probably better. But like Harrison Smith can't teach someone to be 6'2", 215 and really fast. Kyle Hamilton can't teach someone to be 6'4". Xavier Watts can teach what makes him great to a degree.
Yeah.
And I think that translates very well.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what the defense is going to look like. And we're going to have a better idea once we're able to get out and see spring practices. Obviously, the blue gold game was just announced. I can't believe it's already in 67 days. It's just a little over 2 months away, which I think is absolutely crazy. But all of these things are going to be question marks that we're going to kind of find out along with everybody else. We're along for the ride too. But there are a lot of reasons why we believe that this is going to be something that's really, really positive, right? The defense has a lot of different tools to come back and be as dominant as they were, and they have the opportunity to be better than what they were. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy to say now, but there's a lot of the conversation after the 2023 season. Man, wouldn't it be so great if their defense ended up somehow better? It's like, well, they lost Cam Hart, and Marist, and JD, and they lost a couple edge rushers and Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So, we'll see. They got the pieces to do it, but we'll see. And then they were, right? But we're getting ready to dive into our reasons for optimism here. And there's a lot of them, right? But listen, guys, before we do, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, whichever platform you watch us on. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And the best way to support what we're doing here and the conversations that we have here every day when we go live are happening currently on the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.